Right. It all started for me when I was born in Ayrshire. And if you don't know where that is, it's in southwest Scotland. I was born in 1962. It was a good year. And I was brought up in the mining village of Dalmellington, not too far from here. My parents and my grandparents before them, they were all members of the Church of Scotland. And my dad, Hugh Clark, who quite a few of you maybe have known, he was an elder and a Sunday school teacher, as well as being the church officer, which is a fancy title that basically means caretaker. So this basically meant that my mum and dad cleaned the church every week, and they also prepared it for weddings, funerals, communion, because our communion was a bit different to the communion we've had this morning, where there would be sort of white tablecloths pinned to all the pews and everything. It was all very formal. So the church had to be all prepared for that. So all these sort of events. So this meant that in my early years, I spent an awful lot of time in the church building, and it became almost like a second home. And like most of my school friends, I attended church and Sunday school. I went on the Sunday school trips, and I was taken, to the social evenings in the church hall. I didn't really like them. Church was a big part of my life. During my early years, I can remember a few occasions at my grandfather's house, and it was usually around the holidays, like summer or Christmas, when some of my dad's cousins would visit. The room would contain professors of theology, church ministers, evangelists, missionaries as well. And you would get this lively debate that would ensue. And at the time, I understood very little of it. But this was the church and Bible stuff that I grew up with.
So, this is me and my brother. My brother Gary, he's 7 years older than me. A lot of my cousins were older than me. So when I was born, there were 7 years between me and Gary. My mum was the youngest on her side, and my dad was a sibling of 7. So I did have quite a few aunts and uncles, and a lot of people on my mum's side would take me out and take me to the circus. We'd go to Bellevue, the fairground in particular. One loved to buy me beautiful dresses, which is why I like wearing nice dresses now. I nearly wore a really, really nice dress this morning, but I just was too hot. So just at that point, I would like to say that when I was born, my dad was, at the point of my birth, my dad was advised to get me christened because he didn't think I was going to live. But God had other plans. So even from a young age, he had a plan, and believe me, he gave me a warrior spirit, which I think that came in then, a fighter, for all the good things. Now, I attended nursery, and I'm sure I was one of those challenging children. And Mum always used to say that I was born asking why. And many people now have been on the receiving end of that question when I've said why. Not a lot has changed. So anyway, at the end of the nursery field, there was a school which my brother attended, because obviously he was 7 years old and he's just started secondary school. And there was this fence, iron fence. I used to run up to the field and say, "Gary, take me home." And he'd say, "No, I can't." I said, "Don't you worry, I'll sort it out with everybody. You just take me home, I'll make it right with everybody." So he'd say, "Right, I'll come back." But of course, he never did. He used to say, "Get me out of here because they're all rubbish." So at 3, I contracted measles, and this left me completely deaf on this side. So if ever you shout at me or talking to me and you want my attention, either kick me or hit me or tap me on the shoulder. But whatever you do, stand on the left, because otherwise I'll just completely ignore you. A lot of people have prayed for my healing in this, but me and God have had an argument because I quite like my peaceful night's sleep when I don't get disturbed. So when I turn over, the shutters are down, can't hear anything. My gran lived across the road, and I absolutely adored her. She'd take me to church. She had an incredible faith, and like David's dad, was a caretaker of the church. Her faith inside her was really alive. It was unsuppressible. She did it in everything. You could see it was lived out in every area of her lives. It was amazing. So even at that time, I'd not really known that I'd got a relationship with God, but some kind of connection was happening. And she took me to church, and I couldn't read, so I decided to sing anyway. Does anybody know the tune to Onward Christian Soldiers? Onward Christian soldiers, marching as to war. Now sing Mary had a little while. So even at that point, God had a plan over my life. And I said, my gran was mortified. She said, "Would you stop? You can't sing that." And I'd say, "Well, I'm singing to Jesus, and he likes it." So a lot of tuts and what have you in church was had when I was singing. At 7 years old, I felt an inner voice telling me that I was going to be a nurse. And I probably can say it probably was an audible voice of God. I remember exactly what I was doing at the time. I remember where I was going and what I was doing, and it literally made me stop in my tracks. And even at that point, went back home and told people. And we were all a bit, oh, right, okay. So my parents were doing the best job of parenting alongside running a business. And Dad was working as a joiner. Remember the 7 years between me and Gary. So as I grew up, I loved spending time with him. And looking back at that age, it wasn't a lot of time, as he'd been in hospital for medical reasons and for a long time, took him a long time. And then he was off being a teenager. And then he didn't want me alongside him, his little sister, while he was doing teenage stuff. So there's a lot of tears and a lot of arguments. And if I can have the next picture, please, Peter. And as you can see, we no longer argue. We do spend a lot of time laughing together, quite spontaneously. So due to stuff that had happened in the marriage before me and Gary arrived, my dad was very controlling. I loved him, but due to this overhanging stuff that he'd never really resolved, it was dominating the whole family. And it dominated control in every part. It was the only part of his world that he could control, which was us. And it meant that those around him lived a very difficult life. My mum would always try and keep the peace, but not upset him. So we had dominance over the television, how and where he ate his meals, which was actually a rolling tea trolley, and every night my mum would walk in with a trolley like this, with his tea on it. And then, "Don't say a word, your dad's eating his tea." So anybody that came to the door would be vetted. They weren't allowed to be men or boys, in my case. And his chair was sat near the window, so he could see who was coming to the door. And if you didn't like who you saw, don't answer the door. I had to account for my whereabouts in every second of every day. I lived a very, very restricted life. He was very strict. He let me go to the park and shouted my name once and only once. And I had to listen for it with me one good ear. And I couldn't afford to miss a second time. So if the television was on, it was because he put it on for his programmes. And Mum spent her evening cleanings because she was in the shop during the day. He had to be first to read the paper, so you didn't dare open the paper when it had been delivered. It had to be left on the back of the sofa, and he read it. And after he'd read it, that was okay. And the cat, if the cat ever sat on his chair, my word. So even the cat was controlled. So as a result of that, you hear a lot of people talk about television, but I genuinely don't like television. That is probably one of the reasons why I don't pay much attention to it. So when I say to you I don't watch television, it's absolutely true. I don't really watch it. Anyway, he was a very funny man. And when he was good, we were all good. And occasionally he'd let his guard down, and you could see how much he really loved me mum. And it was so nice. But I'm telling you this because as a reference to a father, that wasn't my yardstick. Because I knew that I never tainted my view of God. So because of life experiences in their own lives, Dad demonstrated massive control in issues, and my mum became the peacemaker, but there was never any violence, it was always words, which are far more damaging. And as a result of this strictness, rebellion crept into my life, and the only way I could control my word was with my words, which would damage, control, and get the result I wanted, because it was the only thing I had control over. What happened to me when other people were involved, I could control that. So Mum would say, don't upset the customers, just be nice to them, because remember we had a shop. Very often she would say to me, a little bird tells me you've been having a word with somebody. Well, yeah, I only told them the truth. They didn't like it, but I told them anyway. So you say, no, you can't do that because it's bad for business. You've got to be nice to people. And I'd say, well, they don't always tell the truth, Mum. And she'd say, no, you're nice to people. If you want to come home and talk about it with me, you can do, but you can't talk about it with them. But that's not who I am anymore, because God changed all that. There's far more grace now than there ever was. And that part of me doesn't exist. In primary school, I developed extremely bad eczema, covered from head to toe. Literally, this was added to the ensuing list of names. At home, although I knew I was loved, I got given many unfriendly names, not very nice names. As a parent, now me and my brother talk about this, and we're mortified at the names that they were allowed to be called in the house. If they ever heard my brother calling me names, they never really rebuked it. They just let it ride. So the eczema led to a week in hospital for me, years after I met David, and God completely healed this. I've not got one single mark of eczema. Doesn't ever come back.
So, meanwhile, over 200 miles away up in Scotland, I have become a teenager. I still attended church, and I still helped with the cleaning and all that stuff. But now, on a Sunday, I was expected to sit through the sermons rather than escape to the Sunday school. This was to prepare me for becoming a church member at 16, and thus I'd be able to take communion, because in the Church of Scotland, you don't take communion until you're at least 16. However, I found this incredibly boring. As the minister, he just seemed to recycle his sermons over a period of time, and they weren't delivered with any sort of passion. They talk about dour Scots and being very solemn. That's how my old minister delivered his sermons. And they lasted about half an hour, but oh boy. That was a long half hour. But in my mid-teens, I was able to join the Duke Edinburgh's award scheme. And this meant weekend trips away camping and doing outdoor activities, which meant I could miss church. Unfortunately, we didn't do those weekends away as often as I would have liked at that time. But there was also my introduction to the life of a rugby player, because I got to play for the first 15 at school. And that meant trips away with the first 15. And then when I graduated to the Proper Air Rugby Club, there were other forms of sort of drinking clubs and things that took place after the training. But to be honest, I quickly found that the drinking culture, that wasn't for me. But going back to church, what we called the first communicants classes for membership, they took place on midweek evenings. Unfortunately, not on the same night that I met for the Duke Edinburgh Award Scheme, so I had to attend them. But I found them quite boring as well. We had to read various Bible passages for homework, and I remember reading the book of Acts, wondering why the Church of Scotland couldn't be like this. When I asked the minister, he said that it was because the age of miracles was over and the Holy Spirit was now only here to help us understand the Bible, not for us to perform miracles. So it looked like nothing that happened at the time of Jesus and the apostles would ever happen in the Church of Scotland. However, I went ahead, I completed my membership, and I was able to take communion as a member twice a year, like everyone else, at Easter and November. If you had asked me at this time if I was a Christian, I would probably have answered, yes, I'm Church of Scotland. However, during this time, around 1980, a college friend, he invited me to an evening service at his church, which was not the Church of Scotland. It was very much not the Church of Scotland. Well, they had guitars and drums. They were singing lively songs, and they were clapping and raising hands. And they were even speaking in strange languages. I'd never seen anything or heard anything like it. And when I spoke to my parents afterwards, they said, I think you better talk to the minister. So I did. I talked to the minister, and he said, it's better to keep away from strange churches like that. So I carried on attending Church of Scotland, but also enjoying my more frequent weekend trips away with the Duke Edinburgh Award. And this carried on until 1984.
So as a teenager, just a reflection, I loved primary school. I had a lot of friends there, which I've still got. They are still my amazing friends. I hated secondary school. All I wanted to do was pass my exams and become a nurse. As well as being called the horrible names at home, I was also called unthinkable names at school. So because of my eczema, I was called all kinds of names. My big nose led to, horrible names, and my chin together, sort of profile. Isn't that nice? So I was also given those names, along with my long hair. People avoided me because of my skin problem. They thought they'd catch something. So they kept well away after throwing sticks and stones at me. I chased them, but I wasn't quick enough. So I became Rose Queen attendant, but never felt worthy. I was the child that never got picked. Come on, I want more sympathy than that. I was the child that was left on the wall that went, oh, go on, Julie, I suppose we'll have you. So I never really felt like I fitted in. I never really felt I had a place to belong. And I certainly didn't feel worthy to be a Rose Queen attendant. But I was never afraid of confrontation or challenging anything which met my disapproval. I did feel if there was a lack of justice, I would fight that lack of justice. I would go for it, and I would wade into the confrontation, and I would deal with it. So this was the general tone of things at school, when especially in sixth form. If there was a disagreement with one of the teachers, I was delegated to go and talk to them and persuade them why they were so wrong about their decision making. But until I met Jesus, that was the way it was. When it happens now, it's that of kingdom desire rather than man's desire. So you feel injustice over something, it's because it doesn't line up with God's will or God's justice. Then search your heart and say, am I disagreeing with this because it doesn't line up with what God's saying? Or am I just disagreeing it because it's just made me angry? And now, grace is a great big factor in the reactions to those things. So God made us. He knows us inside out. He makes no mistakes. Not one single mistake. Remember, I wasn't meant to be, I was christened at birth. Sometimes we get hold of mistakes. Sometimes we deal with our lives. It's like when we get hold of felt tips. We scribble on things. And sometimes life is like that. We get hold of things, we scribble on them. The things that God's trying to grow in us, trying to develop in us, and we get in the way of it. But let God shine his light on those things. Let him have his way. Let him have his plans for us. Because his plans and purposes for our lives are always good. They're always perfect. And when he wants something to happen, he will always do his best to make sure that comes through. He'll always have his way. At 16, I thought I'd been going to church all my life. I had a dream where God literally called me to himself the day after I was at a Christian gathering at the Queen Elizabeth Hall in Oldham, and I gave my life to Jesus. After trying to explain this dream, I didn't realise it was God talking to me at that time. I felt brand new. I felt washed clean and renewed. I felt like I had a place to belong. I felt like I'd just literally been picked up and planted in this rightful place where God had wanted me. I felt a sense of belonging for the first time. The day after I went to school, and I was the first person in the class to remember this teacher. She was a lady, very stern face, very short, bobbed hair. And I was dead excited. And I said, I made a commitment last night. I met Jesus. And she went, okay. So still not ashamed of speaking out. I became most people's mouthpiece, like I said. Not only in school, but in church. Sometimes I would challenge preachers, although not very diplomatically, because I'd not learned the art of grace at this point. But the president of the Connection, who was like, in the IM church, he's like the leader of the UK churches for the Independent Methodists, came, and I remember him now, he's not long since died. He came and spoke on 2 Chronicles 7:14. Now, a lot of us know that one, but I'll say it anyway. So if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then I will hear from heaven and we'll have I can't remember the last bit. But literally, it literally hit me in the chest, physically hit me in the chest, and nearly fell off my chair. And like when you're looking around to see if anybody else has noticed what's going on, I just knew that was God saying, look, you can have a life of prayer. That's my calling on your life. So like I said to it, God's building us is unique. My name means youthful, beautiful, and vivacious. I like that. I would like to think I'm those things. I absolutely love dancing. Many of you will know that. And as a little aside, 2 years ago, I joined the English National Ballet. Still practicing on the moves. But through my whole life, I felt I've got nothing to lose by being me. Because I was sure that I was the only person that listened to me anyway. But God saw me when I was formed. He saw me when I was born, and he literally saved my life.
So, it's now 1984, and I'm in my 20s. And the early part of 1984, still only 21, the company that I worked for let me go, as I was qualified to the standard to which they'd agreed, and it was pointed out that although they had consented to me working towards my electrical engineering degree, they reserved the right to terminate the agreement should things change. The change was that they wanted to employ an apprentice on a cheaper rate than me. So, meanwhile, the Ayrshire coal industry and all the engineering works which depended on it had vanished. So jobs were hard to come by. But I happened to look on the college notice board and noticed that there were some short-term jobs in various parts of England and right up in northeast Scotland. So I sent off lots of CVs. To cut a long story short, I ended up getting a 6-month contract with Reynolds Electronics in Milnrow. And the building, it's Minky, if you notice, it's Minky now, and it's just alongside what's now New Life Church. So, funnily enough, on April Fool's Day in 1984, I journeyed to England to live in temporary lodgings in Littleborough, a place where there was no Church of Scotland. And what was remarkable about that was I always used to say throughout all my teenage years and into my early 20s, I will never move away from Scotland. And I definitely won't move down to England. So here was me on a train to England on April Fool's Day. So Reynolds Electronics, it was very busy at the time. And I ended up being asked to join permanently. And they said they'd put me through my HND, and then they'd put me through my degree. And so I accepted, thinking that in a few years' time, I could return to Scotland with a degree and get a job in the blossoming semiconductor industry in the west of Scotland. I had it all sorted. So I became service engineer with a company car, travelling all over the UK and Europe, visiting my parents in Scotland, only attending church when I went back up to visit my parents because there was a Church of Scotland up in Scotland. And this continued until 1988.
So, as I mentioned before, I've never been ashamed to behave as I feel, just as I feel. But now it's all for Jesus and not for Julie. I've danced when the music comes on. Love dancing. If somebody puts a tune on, I'm there on the dance. First on the dance floor, last to be off it. Don't really care what you think about me dancing. But we'll be having fun. I've worn the brightest colours. I love bright colours. I love red. I love wearing bright colours. I've cheered the loudest, cried the hardest, laughed the heartiest, and still do over the years. I thank God so much that I'm not the person I used to be. It's only through him that I'm here today. He's literally turned me around, literally. Not long after I got baptised, it was prophesied that I would know the secrets of God, and that's definitely come to fruition and still does. Started my nurse training at 19 and lived in the accommodation, but I think my parents found it harder than me, because they were constantly saying, make sure you ring at 6 o'clock. Make sure you ring, let me know what you've had for your tea. Are you coming home tonight? You're not working tomorrow, are you coming home? No. Oh, but you should come home. Tinker's missing you. Tinker was the cat that couldn't sit on the chair. So my mum was all right. You know, my mum had no problem with me being away. I think she wanted me to fly. But my dad was different. And then when I came home, he grumbled about bringing me back. So after a failed relationship, which left a few ripples in its wake, I got asked to go to a fancy dress. But I'd been working on a late shift, which meant that I was working till 10:15, and I was working the day after. So I stood in the mirror wearing a khaki skirt and a nice, bright, colourful, jungle-coloured plows. And I said to God, right, God, if I'm going to go, because I've had this failed relationship, I'm ready now. You better make it worth my while. Because I'm not going there and coming back with nothing. Of course, like God had okay. So there we are, dancing away, come on. Dancing away to this tune. And David says, what have you come as? What
have you come as?
Jane. Jane. So I went as Jane. Yeah. So, anyway, can we have the next picture, please, Peter? Yeah, them got married. During our years, 34 years this year of married, we have been tested beyond anything anybody could ever write. No way could anybody write the stuff we've been through. But God has been so faithful. I got baptized with David about 26 years ago. I did actually have a very long conversation with God about that, whether or not I should do it. Debated for years and years and years, but God won. I've changed churches, again, argued over that, because I thought God was wrong. And if I can have the last picture. The fourth picture, please, Peter. This is the four of us. This is what we like to do. We spend a lot of time laughing. Even when we shouldn't do, we spend a lot of time laughing. I feel that it's only because of Jesus I've been successful in my role as a specialist nurse. And he's heard my thoughts in the early days about not working weekends. And then that was even as long as 10 years ago. And further still, not working on Fridays. I don't work Fridays now. I don't really work weekends. He's fulfilling his plans for my life as I continue to grow my service to him in prayer. My name is beautiful, vivacious, and that is what I am. Because I know I'm a child of God. Again, like I said, online English National Ballet, probably don't know who I am, but my brother has been brought back from the dead, literally. I've been healed of eczema. My daughter's been healed of a broken leg and some other medical conditions. God has provided in every area of our lives and continues to do so. And we give him all the glory. Yeah. Last picture, please, Peter.
So you've kind of had a preview into the story of what life's been like with Julie. But I'll give you my version of events now. So, 1988, when we met. And at that point, for me, life was really hectic at Reynolds Electronics. Funnily enough, I'd not got back to Scotland. And I was the only service engineer out on the road. All the rest of the service department, they were factory-based. Driving miles on the motorway, sometimes I'd do over 60,000 miles a year. And going abroad was losing its appeal. And then in 1988, I met Julie. Funnily enough, in the Bateman Centre in Birch Hill Hospital, where branches used to meet. Although it wasn't at a branch's church service that we met, because the Bateman Centre was used for parties and social events in the hospital as well. Julie's told you what she was wearing. When I met Julie, I was wearing my kilt, and I'm going to leave it at that. Although I believe there are photographs somewhere. We got talking. And it transpired that, as I thought, no, you weren't called Jane, that we both had church in common. Although Julie was attending a bit more regularly than I was. She explained that her church was an independent Methodist church in Failsworth. I'd never heard of independent Methodist churches. And would I like to come and see her dance at an evening service? I said, yes. But I thought, here we go again. Another weird church. However, when I got there, it was actually really good, with some interesting teaching on the Holy Spirit, which was quite new to me. And it was during my time at Roman Road, Julie's old church, that I learned about relationship with Jesus rather than religion. And I realized that all my church going over the years was futile, without acknowledging Jesus as my Lord and Savior. Just all pointless. It's, you have to realize, and I can't stress this enough, that it is personal relationship. It's not religion. Religion is very pharisaical. It's not going to get you anywhere. So, during this time, even though I was convinced that I was a Christian, during this time, I committed my life fully to Jesus. And then, not long afterwards, I received the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and then things really began to change. I started speaking in strange languages, tongues, this strange language that my Church of Scotland minister had told me to avoid. The Bible, it came alive, and I started to understand it more. I also started worship leading at Roman Road, although I had to ask what a worship leader was when I was given this prophetic word that I'd be one. When I was told what a worship leader did, I said, it's not for me. As I was a very shy person, and I always liked to sit quietly right at the back and not get involved too much. But then again, I did say I could never live in England and I would always stay in Scotland. So I got it wrong before. Then, in 1990, and you've already seen the picture, Julie and I got married. And 2 years later, Andrew was born. We carried on living in Littleborough, travelling to church in Failsworth, until about 1995, when we were actually due to move from Littleborough to Newey. But around the same time, there was an evangelist, a guy called Keith Wills, and he had come to Roman Road for a week's mission. And he kept talking about Christians being salt and light, and that the salt needs to get into the chips. I realized that the people in Failsworth weren't mine and Julie's chips. And we needed to find a church in the Rochdale area. This led us full circle, back to the branches, still at the Bateman Centre. Different circumstances at the Bateman Centre, but back to the Bateman Centre in 1995. 2 years later, Bethia was born. So we'd been coming to branches for a bit, and there was a lot of teaching on baptism, and lots of people were getting baptized. I thought, I don't need to be baptized. I've been christened. I got christened when I was 6 months. Not that I could tell you much about it, but apparently I didn't like it. But I kept thinking about this, and I kept talking to Julie about it. And I came to the conclusion that as I had had no say in whether I wanted to be christened at 6 months old, I wanted to make a public confession of my faith in Jesus by being baptized. And I was so pleased, so pleased, when Julie agreed that even though she'd been christened, that she would be baptized at the same time. We were baptized together. And the other thing that really delighted me, because they were in a bit opposition, my parents, because they took me for christening. But I was so pleased that after talking to them and explaining to it, that they both come down from Scotland. And I said to them, it'll be so good to have you there, because actually what you're seeing is almost like the fact that you had me christened. You're now seeing the fulfillment of that. You're now seeing your son actually making his own confession of faith due to his own choice, not somebody having me christened. And it was an amazing evening. It was, there were loads of us baptized at Hebron that day, and what a party that was. And I just felt this absolute amazing feeling, and loads of you have felt it when you come out of that water, that you just feel so clean, and it is your new life is starting. And so there's an advert for baptism. I thoroughly recommend it. And I can honestly say that my life since becoming a Christian, rather than just a sporadic churchgoer, a non-Christian really, it has been life and life to the full. Yes, there have been problems. I've got to be honest. There's been lots of problems. And Jesus actually said we would have problems. But I shudder to think what it would have been like trying to navigate those problems without the support of Jesus, and also the support of Branches Church. That's why we need the church. We need Jesus, but we need the church. That's basically my testimony. You'll have noticed that I've said a lot about going to church, being brought up in church. I've talked about church. The emphasis is not on going to church. Because going to church, as I say, that's not going to make you a Christian. You're just a churchgoer. Being brought up even round all these professors, theologians and everything, that didn't really help either, because I didn't have a clue, because I didn't have the Holy Spirit. I didn't have a clue what they were going on about. But it was very lively debate. That never made me a Christian. Only Jesus. A personal relationship with Jesus, only that could set me free from my past, and all the glory goes to him. Amen.